minutos antes para probar. ¿Qué hago que sea conectar por lo menos 10 minutos antes para... Escúchame.
Estoy teniendo un pequeño problema con...
¿YouTube? Ahí está. Pero yo te estoy viendo en YouTube.
¿Con el link que te mandé? ¿Sí?
Veo un pelo atrasado, pero te veo.
Ah, entonces está ok. Ya, perfecto. Entonces, no, lo que hace es que... Ya, no. Entonces está ok.
Voy a ponerle silencio nomás para que no se me vaya como a escuchar.
Sí, hay que ponerle silencio a la...
A ver. Ya, Elena me dice que está acá.
Hi, hola.
Hi, Elena, how are you?
Good. Let me just see if I can. Okay, let's start the video. Hey.
Hola,
Hi,
Elena.
Hola.
Acho que você fala português, né?
Falo português. o espanhol, né?
Yeah, mais ou menos.
Mas o português a gente fala.
Tá. Para mim é mais melhor falar em português que falar em inglês. Então,
Why, sorry, but why you speak Portuguese? I don't speak anything, so you will let me out if you continue with Portuguese. Why do you speak Portuguese?
So, well, Elena, first of all, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, for this conference. And first, now I test the connectivity, and if you can, please, and now you are co-amphitryon for by Zoom, so you can now to show your slides.
Oh, okay. So share the screen, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's see if you can you see my screen?
That's right. Great. Yeah. Right. It's full. Okay.
I will. When I start, I will do the full presentation mode. I don't know if you want me to do now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's better. Let's try it just to be completely sure.
Okay. So what do you see? Because I have some notes.
Yes, it's great. It's full. This is good. So any problem? No, we have not problem. So.
Sorry, Elena, I'm going to speak in Spanish just 1 second. Pedro, no, YouTube está pegado.
Yeah.
Le di un segundo, pero ahora puede ser mi computador, que se quedó pegado a mi computador. En todo caso.
¿Tú lo estás viendo por el link que te envié? Sí.
Sí.
Yeah. Okay. So it's great. So we started at 6 p.m. What hour is in Brazil? You are in Brazil now, really?
Yeah, just 1 hour ahead, so 7 here.
Before.
Yeah.
Okay. We started in 15 minutes more. So now I put my screen for formally screen.
Okay.
And we will start at 6 p.m. o'clock. Okay.
And you only see the big presentation. You don't see my notes, right?
No.
Because I have some notes as well. But you don't need to see my notes just because I want to show the whole
The whole slide.
slides.
No, we are seeing the whole slide, not the notes.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Okay, so don't worry.
So are you cheating? Are you reading notes at the same time?
Yeah, no, just because for me to not forget anything, and as you know, I speak too much. So to contain myself.
Okay.
Para não falar muito, hablar de más. Okay, thank you.
Okay. See you in 15 minutes more, okay? We
Okay.
started. I introducing you. At first, I introducing Alejandra, and then you maybe speaking in Portuguese.
Okay.
So then Alejandra is the person that introduced you formally, and during your conference, any questions, Alejandra ask you the questions by YouTube or by Zoom channels for your answer, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Tá bom. Então,
10 minutos más. ¿Por qué hablas portugués?
bueno, para los presentes, probamos sonido, probamos cámara y vamos a conectarnos en 10 minutos más, ¿ok? Vamos aquí. Aló, muy buenas tardes, ¿cómo están todos y a todas? Muy buenas tardes, ¿cómo están? Bueno, mi nombre es Pedro Aravena, soy profesor y director de la Universidad de Odontología de la Universidad Austral de Chile. A nuestros 84 espectadores en Zoom y a las 15 personas que tenemos en YouTube, les doy la cordial bienvenida a este ciclo de charlas, ¿ya? De la Conferencia del Sur de Chile que organiza la Universidad Austral de Chile. ¿Ya? Perdón, vamos a... Se acopla por todos lados. Bueno, en esta ocasión tenemos una conferencista internacional, ¿ya? Y voy a darle bueno, primero que todo, bienvenida, y me gustaría saber, como ya es costumbre, ¿cierto?, saber de dónde nos están viendo. Para eso les voy a pedir a quienes están en Zoom y en YouTube, ¿cierto?, que nos escriban en el chat de dónde provienen para poder nosotros saber así quién nos está oyendo, ¿ya? Tenemos ya por gente que está conectada, ¿cierto?, que acá de Valdivia, que son colegas de la Universidad Austral, pero tenemos gente de Viña del Mar, de Santiago, ¿ya?, de Cabildo, Puerto Montt, La Cruz. La Cruz será, esto no es Chile, ¿sí? Isidora Valenzuela, que escriba, Iquique, Villarrica, Lanco, ya tenemos gente de todo Chile y también gente del extranjero, de Quillota, La Cruz, ya tenemos gente del Perú también, ya gente de Colombia, aquí se está escribiendo, así que es muy, muy importante esta plataforma. Diego Graciano de Puerto Rico, saludos allá a Centroamérica, ¿ya? Así que bueno, aquí también gente de YouTube, también puede escribir en el chat, ya de dónde proviene, para así saber y dar mis saludos a ellos, ¿vale? Gente de Cartagena, Colombia. Somos internacionales, así que muy contentos. Pues bien, las indicaciones, como todos saben, como es costumbre todos los lunes, esta conferencia son certificadas por la Universidad Austral y para ello le pido que al final de la conferencia, en el chat, escriban su nombre completo y su correo electrónico para hacer la respectiva certificación. Bueno, recordar que esta charla va a ser en inglés, dado que nuestra conferencista internacional es brasileña, ¿cierto? Pero ella prefirió hacer, ¿cierto?, su charla en inglés y quien va a dirigir es, y ahora la presento, nuestra colega Alejandra Letelier. ¿Ah? Alejandra, te doy la palabra. Saluda a tu público. Tienes tu micrófono, creo que tienes tu micrófono.
Perdón, toda la razón, ahora sí, ahora está prendido. Bueno, muchas gracias, Pedro. Yo desde acá vamos a seguir en inglés para no dejar afuera a la presentadora y a cualquier persona que pueda estar escuchándonos desde algún lugar donde se hable inglés o otro idioma. Así que, welcome everybody. Thanks a lot for being here this evening. As you already know, we are going to talk about a really relevant and sometimes difficult to talk topic, that is racism and racial discrimination. And for doing this, well, I have to say that we are really sorry that one of our speakers won't be able to be here. Joao is having some family issues that doesn't allow him to be here today, but we are still extremely lucky to have with us one of the persons that most knows, one of the researchers that most knows about this topic and the relationship between racism and health services. As Pedro said, she's from Brazil. Her name is Helena Mendes Constant, who I am really lucky that is a close friend. She has a PhD in epidemiology and public health at UCL, University College of London. And she's currently doing a postdoc in, I have to read it because I'm not really good with Portuguese, but it's University of Santa Catarina in Florianopolis. So I hope I said it right.
Yes, you did.
So, and she's currently doing research in this topic, okay? So I'm going to say no more. Yes, a last thing. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a space for questions. So if anybody has any question, you can either make them at the end, or you can write them at the chat and I will read it to Elena at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to leave space for Elena. And the microphone is yours. And thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you very much. I think Pedro wants to say something now because he just appeared.
Yeah, okay, I will speak em português, só para eu vou falar mais em português que em inglês, então eu vou falar em português só para agradecer a você desta palestra. Muito obrigado por seu tempo, por sua dedicação e só você é bem-vinda aqui no Chile se você tem planificado viajar para cá para fazer uma palestra ou fazer um churrasco aqui com a gente. Tá?
Eu nunca fui ao Chile, mas agradeço imensamente a Alejandra por ter me convidado, e a você, Pedro, por também organizar. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Alejandra, and thank you, Pedro, for organizing this. Thank you.
Okay, no, you're welcome, and please, and the pool is yours.
Okay, so let me just share the screen. So can you see the screen? No, no.
Yes, we can, but we can see it with the notes.
Okay, let me just.
Yeah, there it is. There it is.
Is it? Can you see the big screen?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. So just to check, on YouTube, you only see me, or you see the screen as well?
What a good question. Yes, no, we are seeing you.
And maybe the screen. Oh, I see that, because I have, okay. So thank you very much again for inviting me. Can you hear me really well?
Yeah.
Okay,
At
good.
least I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so so before I go on, I just once again thank you, Alejandra and the Universidad Austral de Chile, for inviting me. As Alejandra mentioned, João could not be here today, but we are very much passionate about this topic, which is investigating racial inequities and trying to educate students, researchers, policymakers, and society as a whole. And unfortunately, he could not be here, but hopefully we're going to have a good discussion at the end. So today I will talk about racial inequities in access to dental service in Brazil specifically, and what do we know and how we can move towards equity. So you might think that because I'm going to talk about Brazil, this knowledge may not be applicable to, let's say, Chile or other countries. But I urge you, however, to consider two aspects. So each country has its own way of classifying its population. And with this classification, it's quite complicated to compare racial groups to ethnic groups. At the same time, worldwide, we know that racial and ethnic minorities are observed to be more likely to have worse health and oral health outcomes. And I'm sure Chile is not different. And they suffer from racist societies and the privileges that white counterparts have. So therefore, you can use the structure of this presentation to find out how these inequities present themselves in your own country. So we outline this presentation into 4 parts. We're gonna first to determine the goal in studying racial inequities in health services. Then we're going to talk about trying to illustrate a bit of how racial inequities present themselves in Brazil. Then we're going to move on to demonstrate current knowledge on racial inequities in access to health and dental services. And at the end, we're going to try to discuss unexplored pathways and tools to move towards equity. So please stop me if for some reason you don't hear me or if the connection is not very good. So before we think about study differences between racial groups or ethnic groups, it's highly recommended to consider the reason why the investigation is actually needed. This is important because we should not encourage neither a biologist's approach nor a racist interpretation for these social characteristics. So actually we need to highlight that race is a social construct that carries on its concept the historical burden of oppression suffered by minority groups. And this definition is actually from Dr. Kamara Jones. So throughout this presentation, when you hear me talk about race, I'm actually applying this concept of race that actually operates structural racism and highlights race-based inequities. So let's just remember that inequities is unfair and unjust differences. So in Brazil, as we see in the following, slides, brown and black individuals are considered some of the minority groups, and research has shown that compared to whites, they have higher difficulty accessing health services, they have longer intervals between medical and dental visits, they also depend more heavily on public medical and dental service, and they sometimes they don't have coverage for healthcare plans, and sometimes they have less coverage. And at the same time, they are more likely to suffer from discrimination from healthcare professionals. So we have in Brazil 5 racial groups: white, brown, sometimes called, because in Portuguese we call pardo, but throughout this presentation I'm going to call brown. So white, brown, blacks, yellow, and indigenous individuals. And Brazil does not categorize its population by the concept of ethnicity, which is more focused on grouping individuals into shared languages, nationalities, culture, religion, for example. Nevertheless, we have to remember the history of Brazil. So the history of exploration and colonization is actually a strong prediction of this country's demographic composition. So just to remind ourselves that the country was actually discovered, and I'll put this in quotations, the country was discovered in the 1500s by the Portuguese explorer. And the Portuguese exploration lasted until 1822. That's when the independence was declared. So during that period, Brazil was considered the country that most important African slaves into the Americas. And by the end of this 300 period of slavery, it was considered that almost 70% of the Brazilian population was of African descent. So you can see, for instance, in this figure on the left-hand side, the distribution of Brazilian racial groups. Although I'm using the word race throughout this presentation, the official concept that used in Brazil since 1991, which I highlighted in red, is color race, which makes everything very complicated. And you can see in these last 3 periods that we have this similar methodology, the distribution of the groups. So in the right-hand side, I am showing you actually the last census conducted in Brazil, which was 2010. And at that time, we noticed that we have over 50% of the population declared as brown and black. So currently, so this is 2010, right? But currently we have every half a year the estimation. So currently Brazil has around, over 2010 million individuals, and 56% of this 2010 millions are actually brown and black individuals. So they comprise around 117 million people. So keep that in mind, keep that number in mind, 117 million throughout this presentation. So after understanding who are the racial groups in Brazil, we can actually move on and see how racial groups are distributed in terms of contextual and individual characteristics. So these 2 photos were actually taken during this year's pandemic. So now in the beginning of the year, and we can very much, this can very much give a hint of the situation in this country. So if you want to, you can look for those photographers, and I put their names below. So you can very much see how Brazil situation is. And before anything, I would like to make it very, very clear that when we talk about racial inequities, we are talking about injustices that happens in this country. So Brazilian-based research has shown that the remnants of the lack of equitable rights among racial minorities, so this 300 years of slavery that we have here compared to, so this inequities compared to whites are still evident. And this brings us to what we are really talking about, which is racism. So there are many definitions of racism, especially in the US, where the topic is more studied. But both me and João, we really like the definition by Dr. Kamara Jones. So she says, and I'm going to make this quote as a quote, racism is a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on the social interpretation of how one looks, which is what we call race, that unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities and unfairly advantages other individuals and communities and saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. So throughout this presentation, you will see how racism has played as a risk factor for the lives of these racial minorities. More specifically, we're going to talk about brown and black population in Brazil. So Brazil is divided into 5 regions, as you can see in this smaller map. On the right-hand side, so the colors, right? So we have the green as north, yellow as the northeast, the central as orange. Then we have pink as southwest and the purple as south. So the distribution of racial groups is unequal, and you can see here on the bigger map. So the bigger map, the darker the color of the map, the higher the proportion, and we actually showing the proportion of brown and black individuals. So this is according to the 2010 national census. And as I mentioned, at 2010, we had more than 50% of the population self-ascribed as brown and black. But when we look at this map, we can see that more than 50% of brown population is actually on the northeast, and 70% of the black population is on these regions as well, so north and northeast. And most of the white individuals are on the south and southeast regions, which is the purple and the pink. So black individuals were considered a disadvantaged group since the beginning of Brazilian exploration history, as I mentioned before. And by the end of slavery, which was around 1888, the proper end, but we know that things continue on. So these groups of individuals actually did not have an equal opportunity since the really beginning of the first Republic period in Brazil. And the European immigrants that started to come to Brazil had much more advantages compared to them. So they had, for instance, industrial jobs, they had land grants, and the black population were concentrated in north and northeast, considered the most deprived areas of the country. And we can see here that on the left-hand side, you see the figure, right, showing the regions. And again, you see that brown and blacks are more concentrated in the north and northeast. This is 2010. And at the same time, you see the map on the right-hand side, which shows the Human Development Index. I don't know if it is big enough on your screen. So the regions where most citizens belong to brown and black groups are those that have low lack of resources, which is what the Human Development Index are really about. So lack of resources to provide actually a long and healthy life, decent standard of living, and this is represented by the orange and the red color here. So here as another example and another representation of what I'm really talking about, a lot of people heard about Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo when they think about Brazil. And I want to show this other picture about Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. So let's not only look at the regions differences, but also look within a city. So here on the left-hand side, we can see a comparison map between race and class distribution of the so-called Zona Sul, which is the south zone of the city of Rio de Janeiro. So this work was conducted by Hugo Nicolau Barbosa de Guzmão, And you can actually access this work by looking at this link that I mentioned here on the below the page. So brown and black individuals live, as you can see on this map, live in the peripheries of this very well-known part of the city. And sometimes they are restricted, for instance, to slums or housing estates. And the image on the right-hand side is a photo of São Paulo. And you can see clearly the difference in living conditions in Brazil. So at the same time that I'm showing here this to you, we cannot generalize and say that only racial minorities, they live in slums or housing estates. But unfortunately, this group of people is less likely to occupy and live in a better housing conditions compared to whites. So the historical residential segregation that I just mentioned and social exclusion to which browns and blacks are subjected to in Brazil is just one example of what racial minorities have to endure. Other contextual and as much as a problematic factor is the political representation in Brazil. So representation matters because the voices of this population are not heard and actually are not barely spoken if we think about looking at these pictures, both in the federal deputy house and the senator house. So we can see here from the 2018 data from the Brazilian Congress, that most of these groups are white. This on the left-hand side, so 75% from the federal deputies and 82.7% among the senators. And if you look on the right-hand side, we can see that they are white and actually white male. And among the federal deputies, we have one self-ascribed indigenous, 2 as yellow, and 125 combined as brown and blacks, in opposed to 385 white. This is among the federal deputies. And among the senators, among these 81 senators, we have 14 black and brown together compared to 67 white. So we don't have any indigenous and no yellow representations among the senators. So how can we actually do something if the people that make the law and make the things happen in this country are pretty much white? So although I only show you 2 contextual factors in which browns and black population have worse outcomes, there are many other contextual factors that actually reflect on the individual characteristics. So these 4 figures are a representation of the socioeconomic inequities in Brazil over time. So you can see that this is 1995 through 2013. And these 4 figures are a representation of socioeconomic inequities. In the upper figures, you have differences in income. In the lower figures, we have differences in education. So brown and black population have a historical economic disadvantage compared to whites, as we can see in the first figure on the upper left-hand side. And this did not change throughout 20-year period. So overall, we can see the white have earned 3 times sometimes more than black individuals. And this income gap can also be observed when we stratify by gender in this upper right figure. So brown and black women have earned almost half of what white women earn, and brown and black men have earned less than white women. So looking at the low figures, so this is level of education. On the lower left, we look at the illiteracy rate. So what is illiteracy rate? Illiteracy rate represents those who have difficulties in, let's say, just write a simple statement, and also in read a simple statement. And we can see that, so brown and black population, they have 2 times higher than this illiteracy rate compared to whites in the past decade. And the last figure, which is the lower right, this is for the population that was educated for 12 years or more. So meaning they actually finished primary in high school when they were, so they completed primary in high school. And we can see that whites is 2 times more higher than browns and blacks. and the lower proportion of browns and blacks in higher education. So actually what does it mean, right? So the lower proportion of brown and blacks in higher education in Brazil implies that these individuals, what I have been mentioned so far, these individuals, they don't have equal access to the most prestigious occupation, and consequently, they don't have access to higher paid jobs. So why I'm talking about this? So all these contextual and individual level characteristics that I mentioned, and many others there exist, they are really important to either health and oral health, and consequently health services and dental services. So as I brought up in this very well recognized publication by Joe Fallon and Bruce Link, and also in line with the definition of racism that I mentioned to you in the beginning by Dr. Kamari Jones, racism it has a fundamental part in this net that goes through health and oral health inequities. So we just saw briefly that racial minorities in Brazil, they have an accumulation of disadvantages and experience throughout their lives. And historically, that must be considered, right? So racism is a system, and it acts through these multiple mechanisms. And I must emphasize that many scholars that are expert on this topic, because I'm just really in the beginning, I say because I'm really passionate about this and trying to show this, but there are too many people that are very expert on this topic, and they advocate that socioeconomic factors are only part of the problem, as you can see in this representation in an orange color. So these systems and mechanisms end up generating racial differences in health and also in oral health. So looking at the health outcomes in Brazil, this is a study conducted in Brazil with data from the 2000 census on the map. And we can see that black and brown, sorry, not we can see, but the study showed that black and brown population had on average 6 fewer years of life compared to whites. And we can see this on this map, which shows life expectancy in Brazil for the year 2010. So here, the higher the life expectancy, the darker the color. And we can see that North and Northeast, again, show lower years compared to South and Southeast. Other examples of higher burden in health is shown by these 3 other studies that I'm showing in these slides. So the first one is from 2010 data, which was the last census, from the Brazilian Mortality Information System. And a death due to stroke was higher among Black and Browns individuals compared to whites. So why I'm showing, I'm focused on death due to stroke, because cerebral vascular disease are one of the leading causes of death in Brazil and also worldwide. And we can see here that in the leading cause, we see inequities among Blacks and whites, and also by gender. So evidence also showed that the Northeast region also have a higher maternal mortality rate compared to the South region. And it was observed that Black women have 7 times higher odds of dying compared to whites. And also Browns here have a similar rate. So this is maternal mortality by 100,000 births. And looking at this table, we see worse self-rated health. So how people perceive their own health, right? So we see that Black women are more likely to have higher odds than white men, but also white female have higher odds and Black males, but Black women suffer the most. So how about our health, right? So in our health, we don't see here much difference because of these all connections, they are all interrelated. So our health, we see inequities between the brown and Black individuals, and they are shown to more, the brown and Black individuals, they are more likely to have dental caries, periodontal disease, dental pain, oral cancer, and tooth loss. This is some of the studies that I'm just mentioned to you, but there are many more. So this is the main oral health outcomes, right? So this higher burden in health and oral health are thought to underline higher demand for care. So if you have worse health and worse oral health, you're going to need more services, health and dental services. So just before I move on to talk about the current knowledge that we have in both access to health and dental services, I just want to briefly highlight for you to understand how the health system here works in a very simplistic way. So Brazil is a service, the National Health Service here was established in 1988, and it was established with the goal to ensure universal access to healthcare actions and services, and we want to prioritize healthcare equity without prejudice or privilege to any kind. So until this day, there is no cash direct payment. So if you want to go to your doctor or your dentist, you don't pay anything. Of course, there are problems that I'm going to mention, but in the essence, there is no cash and direct payment. And the system is divided in three arms. So we have private sector, public sector, and the supplementary sector, which is, the supplementary is in a very simplistic way, is where you have your health plan and your dental plan. So for dental services in the public sector, we have the primary care, for prevention, simple treatments, and simple extractions, let's say. And then we have secondary care, which involves, for instance, the central of dental specialty, where you can do more specialized, more complex treatment, such, let's say, root canal therapy and implants and so on. And the tertiary care is focused on hospital treatments. And we also have the private services, which then you have to pay, but you can also, if you have, you can use insurance or dental plan. And in 1995, the primary care was reorganized and actually started to be family-centered with a more focus on preventive care. So this governmental program is called Saúde da Família, or Family Health Strategy, whatever you want to call, and was implemented to deliver a more interdisciplinary care. So what do we mean about interdisciplinary? So now we have a team of people. So we have community health agent, we have a nursing assistant and technician, we have a nurse, a physician, oral health assistant and technician, and a dental surgeon. But actually we do have, let's say, a minimum of a team that any primary care should have. And this is portrayed here in pink. So just for us to know that in 2014, so how many people do we have, right? So in 2014, we had 39,000 teams and 30,000 oral health teams. So this group, which I mentioned here, they cover 62% of the population. This is for within the public system. So the public health system has suffered, as I mentioned, from geographic inequalities in provision levels, but also chronic underfunding and stigmatization. So here in these two figures, we can see that geographic distribution of medical doctors in Brazil. So for instance, the Northeast has 1.41 medical doctors for 1,000 residents, and the South has 2.81. And this is also seeing differences in the below figure in the capital cities, which is the blue circle, and the green circles, which interior cities. So there's also differences in distribution of doctors. We also see that these medical doctors are majority white individuals who graduated in private schools, so very hard and very difficult to pay and get and access. And we again show that racial minorities are not represented among medical doctors in Brazil. So is dentistry different? Dentistry is not different. The upper figure here, we show that most dentists are actually situated in the Southeast and the South. And there is a big gap in the North and the Northeast. And moreover, this proportion of, we have like a very white student, so it's 77.8% in 2007. It did decrease a bit from 2004. 2004 was 83%, but it's still very high. So in this figure, you can actually see me. So I'm here as a dentist This is, I don't know what year this picture was taken, but I graduated in dentistry in 2012, and I had no Black Brazilian colleagues and no Black teachers. This was, and I'm from the South, right? So it was during that time that I started to really see the importance to study this topic in more depth. And that was when I met João, and he was my supervisor doing my master's in public health. So representation is such an important topic, and you can see already here, and I cannot stress enough how much this matters. So we can see from the literature that historically oppressed and marginalized brown and Black Brazilians are more likely to report longer intervals between visits. This is medical visits, right? And they depend more heavily on public health services. They are also more likely to not be covered by private health plans and more likely to be discriminated against, as I mentioned, right? So if you focus on women's health, we can see that Black and brown women, oh, this is horrible, right? So Black and brown women have lower antenatal care in their first trimester of pregnancy. They're less likely to receive ultrasound, blood, urine assessment, and to be less likely to be prescribed vitamins or to be given directions for breastfeeding compared to their high socioeconomic white women. They're also less likely to have screening for breast and cervical cancer compared to low socioeconomic women. And this table and figure here show is actually initial results from one of the manuscripts that we've been working on, João and I. And you can see that, so women, they have a higher a higher difficulty accessing health service. This is medical health service as general, right? So they have a higher difficulty accessing health services. Also, brown and Blacks here together called Blacks also have, and higher socioeconomic groups also have higher difficulty access health services compared to their low counterparts. So we also disentangle these characteristics, race, gender, socioeconomic, to understand if there was, in fact, a difference between these groups using what we call as an intersectional approach. And we observe in figure 1 here below, you can see that multiple marginalized groups, so this is like low socioeconomic Black women, they have higher frequencies of difficulty accessing health service compared to their white groups. So the higher frequency was observed among them, and the lower was observed among higher socioeconomic white men. And what about dentistry, right? Dental services. So as in general, health services, the literature on dental services also show racial inequities. And for instance, in the upper figure, this is from the Brazilian Institute of Applied Economic Research. This institute has shown throughout time, so 1998 to 2008, that there is a difference, right, between browns and Blacks and whites, and this is observed historically. So although these differences were overall constant over time in some of the categories, white population were more likely to report recent visits, as you can see on the first part of the upper figure, and brown and Blacks population were more likely to report that their last visit was actually 3 years or more. So in my thesis, using data from the National Oral Health Survey, conducted again in 2010, we can see that brown and Black individuals also depend more heavily on public services, and brown Brazilians adults, more specifically, they were observed to visit the service more due to pain or extraction and treatment compared to their white counterparts. So as I'm approaching the end of this presentation, I want to show these studies. These were all conducted in Brazil with Brazilian data, either collecting data or using secondary data. So these studies conducted in Brazil and also other studies in other countries, they have shown that there is a close link between racial and ethnic minorities and discrimination in our health and in dental services. So there is a body of literature that supports the existence of racial and ethnic inequities in healthcare services utilization. and how this relationship can affect health and also our health outcomes. So these are the studies that aim to measure at some level racial inequities in the provision of dental services in Brazil. And for instance, the study of the upper left is where I'm gonna only talk about this study because it's the most well-known. So what they did, right? So in this study conducted in Brazil with dentists, both in the public dental services and the private service, they showed that dentists decided to extract teeth more frequently for Black individuals than for white patients. The authors observed that this racial variation occurred regardless of dentists' social demographic characteristics, which is highlighted that dentist actions is actually a reflection of the unequal society that we live in. So this is the final part of the presentation. So looking at these final slides, right? So let's just go back to what we're really talking about. So now that we know that all these structures that unfairly disadvantages brown and Black individuals in Brazil as a result of unfairly advantaging white individuals. In this final part of the presentation, we aim to discuss unexplored pathways and tools to move towards equity. And I'm going to go back to Dr. Kamara Jones' publication. This publication is entitled, I have here, Confronting Institutionalized Racism. And this representation on how we can truly achieve, this representation we can see here, as she mentioned in her study, is a representation on how we can truly achieve equity in either access to healthcare, but also quality of healthcare, and I dare say dental care as well. So Dr. Jones and other scholars on the field have divided racism and says that racism operates to impact health in 3 levels: structural, interpersonal, and internalized. So what they mean about structure? Structural racism focus on policies and practice manifesting in material conditions and access to power. So according to scholars, structural racism may be seen in not having access to quality education, housing, health services, as well as being segregated, not having opportunity to higher paid jobs, everything that I mentioned throughout this presentation, especially in the beginning, right? So the interpersonal racism is defined as the prejudice and discrimination by Dr. Jones. And she stated that prejudice is the differentiation assumptions about abilities of one's by others' race, and discrimination is the differentiation actions, right, towards other by race. And this can be exemplified in many ways, but for the purpose of this presentation, we can think about the lack of treatment during health services, give a poor or no services at all, for instance, which is also something that I showed to you during this presentation. And finally, internalized racism, Dr. Jones defines as the acceptance by members of these stigmatized races, let's say here in Brazil, brown and Black, and they see these as negative messages about their own ability and intrinsic worth. So it may manifest itself by embracing whiteness, as she called, as believing that white norms and beliefs someone should accept the white norms. Although all these levels may act distinctly and worsen health and oral health for racial minorities, so Dr. Jones and many other academics and advocates on this issue, they highlight that it's intervening on the structural racism is the most important to have actually permanent change. So final 2 slides, we want to mention 2 studies which aim to give recommendations. So the first one, the first recommendation is actually from a study that is under review that we worked on. First author is João, and this is still under review, right? So the first recommendation is fostering anti-racism in oral health research. So what we mean about that? Science itself may perpetuate racial injustice by adopting, let's say, a more neutral position, which must be replaced with actively fostering anti-racist narratives. So racial differences end up being attributed to, let's say, to behavior and cultural factors. This oral health does that all the time, which may be then assumed to be, let's say, inherited to each group. Also, there is very little discussion on oral health research about the historical process, such as systematic racism. So we need to remember that race has much more to do with power and oppression than with biology. And race is a historically constructed concept that actually reflects the social dynamics and unbalanced human relationships that we have. The second one is studies should not imply that racial oppression is bad because it harms oral health. Such type of research initiatives are actually unnecessary, and they are potentially misleading, as oppression is wrong by definition, not because it underlines poor oral health and oral health inequities. So rather, they should make recommendations, so research should make recommendations that help us build a more just world. And one should remember that there cannot be oral health equity if we still have the power and control over the institutions in the hands of very few group of people. Third, oral health researchers must assume the system of oppression are co-constitutive and conjointly operate to shape oral health. So researchers that investigate oral health effects of, let's say, racial oppression too often rely on measuring interpersonal experience. So just remember interpersonal, which I just mentioned to you, the levels of the racism, right? So they try to measure this interpersonal experience with, let's say, racial mistreat alone. So neither are other forms of discrimination commonly assessed, nor is mistreatment based on a range of social factors, let's say gender, class, or sexuality, simultaneously analyzed in studies in oral health research. So when the idea of interlocking system of inequity are incorporated into the theoretical framework, we might be able to see even strong associations between social injustices and oral health. So fourth, race-based oppression is a multi-level system that manifests itself according to three interrelated concepts: the interpersonal, and structural or institutional. So no study in oral health has addressed institutional or structural dimensions of racial oppression, and by relying on interpersonal alone, racial discrimination, nor just interpersonal racial discrimination, the recommendations that these studies implicitly or explicitly make is that we should intervene upon individuals and their discriminatory behaviors to promote social change. So again, not thinking about the system that we have, and they don't really embrace these anti-racist initiatives. And this is the final study, which is the one who João and Roger, Celeste, and Ian Paradis already published. This is 2019. And this is also a review, and they have 4 policy recommendations. So first, because of their magnitude and persistent over time and space, racial health inequities should be of a primary concern. Second, policymakers, researchers, and dental professionals should be cautious of the existing narrow conceptions of race and the implication of addressing racial inequities. So again, we need to broaden our view. Third, although much of racial inequities in oral health may be attributed to overrepresentation of racial minorities in lower socioeconomic strata, race by way of racism within a racial structure also affects oral health via multiple interconnected non-economic pathways. So remembering again that framework that I mentioned to you in the beginning. And finally, viewing of race from a broader multidimensional perspective moves the focus from micro level factors, so individual level factors, that behavior factors, to the impact of a wider social historical process, and all consequently links the effects of racism. So in this summary of this presentation, this set of policy, the recommendations, actually a call to action against systematic racism as the root cause for racial inequities in oral health. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helena. That was extremely interesting presentation.
Hope you could hear well, because sometimes it is not, my microphone is not very good, so hopefully you could hear.
I am assuming that everybody hears well, because we didn't have any comments on people saying that they couldn't hear.
Okay,
so
good.
I hear you perfectly. So yeah, so I don't think we have a problem with that. Personally, I feel that this kind of topics are so relevant, and sometimes we just don't speak about them, and it becomes this kind of things that everybody like internally know, but nobody really put it like in there, and it's so important we talk about them, like to be more, to make them more real, and to start to try to solving. So thank you very much for the presentation. That was really.
Hopefully I stop sharing, right? Because I'm not very good with Zoom.
Yeah,
so
you did. So now I'm going to open the microphone. If we don't have questions in the chat, so I'm just going to ask the viewers, does anybody wants to make a question, open your microphone and just be brave and do the question.
Hopefully the English was not very bad as well, and hopefully I didn't speak very fast, because Alejandra knows me really well and she knows I speak too fast sometimes. So hopefully I managed to speak slowly, although it's hard.
I have the same problem. Well, if nobody wants to start, I can start with the first question. And this is about, because, well, it is pretty clear that racism in health services, it is a problem. And there are the dentists and the health professionals are definitely sometimes taking some decision based in racism, although they cannot see it. But as a researcher, you clearly show that people from different Black people, part of people are more overrepresented in lower socioeconomic position. So although I agree with everything you have said in your presentation, I have the feeling that some skeptics will say, but this is not racism. This is not racial inequalities. It's just poverty, or just lack of resources. They're asking me if I can repeat the question in Spanish. So,
of course, yeah, please do.
Entonces estoy preguntando de que, aunque está para mí personalmente muy claro que hay un problema de racismo y de inequidades por color, algún investigador o alguna persona escéptica podría decir, no, esto no es racismo, no son inequidades por color, esto es simplemente pobreza, ¿ya? Y básicamente porque las personas de color en Brasil y bueno, en muchos países están sobre representadas en posiciones socioeconómicas más bajas. Entonces, ¿cómo determinar si esto no es pobreza o esto es racismo? Sorry, Elena. So, how can we be able to
I understand your question.
Poverty, racism.
Yeah, this is something that if we speak to individuals that are normally not currently aware of the literature and not currently aware of the problem, it's very much what first comes into their minds is, no, it's only income, just give money and that's going to be it. So first of all, we have to think about the question itself. So why does Black and brown, let's say Black and brown individuals in Brazil have historically less income than whites? So when I give this as an answer, we have to think about, so they are not receiving money throughout this whole history of Brazil. That's why they always gain less money than whites. So again, what is the problem? Is not giving money? No, the problem is they don't receive enough opportunities to gain money. And that's a racism again, showing again why they are not receiving money or education. So there is a problem for sure that these groups of individuals, they are less, they have less access to education and higher paid jobs. But again, this is the middle part, right? So we have to just, if we want to change, we have to go back. So as you can see in that Fallon and Link publication with the framework, so socioeconomic is only part of the problem. And there is other researchers that show this. So Professor David Williams in the United States are someone that really has worked through length throughout this idea that the problem is only socioeconomic situation and we can only give money and education and everything's going to be okay. So yeah, so there is a lot of literature showing that no, there is a problem, of course, but there is a problem that is much higher, much bigger than this. And for us to really make a change, we have to really act against structural racism.
Perfect.
So I think there's other questions in the chat, right?
Yeah, do you want me to read it out loud?
Yeah,
So,
maybe it's good, yeah.
Lesbia Tirado is asking, how does the current health crisis condition this perspective?
Yeah, so COVID-19, I don't know, how do you say COVID-19 in Spanish? Coronavirus? COVID-19.
Coronavirus,
Yeah.
yes, perfect.
So we see that United States, United Kingdom, racial minorities, ethnic minorities have been observed. They are more likely to be in worse conditions, right, and be a lot more likely to die. And in Brazil, it's not different as well. So the problem again, it's not biological. We have to remember that health services is the problem. And I just show you throughout this presentation how we have a problem in health, both in health services and dental services. So these group of individuals, they have less access. So if you don't, so what is the main problem of COVID-19? Is, of course, you need to work. So if you have to go out and you don't have the privilege of working from home, so that's one problem, right? And also if you don't have access to healthcare, how can you actually not die and not get better health? So it's really, COVID-19 is only underlying, showing things that we already know, and not very much a different picture of things that currently happens. I don't know if I answered the question, but anyway.
I think you did. So, ¿hay más preguntas? Does anybody have another question?
I think someone mentioned about, again, the poverty problem and the historical inequality, right? Mm-hmm. So again, it's talking about what you asked. Again, there is of course, there is a historical inequality in income and pobreza, which is like income and education and housing conditions, as I mentioned to you. But again, racism is really related to that. And I think this person, Ulises Rodriguez Diaz, I think he mentioned that. So racism is connected to that. Everything ends up in the same problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the cost of tests. Someone mentioned about cost of tests for COVID-19 again. Yes. So here in Brazil, we have a really big problem in terms of tests, right? So again, access to tests is another problem.
Can I take you one moment from this poverty discussion to another? So I also feel that it's really interesting, the study that dentists were like over-treating patients that have some that are Black or pardos. So I'm just curious to know, are dentists aware that they are doing this? Or I assume it's the same reality with doctors and nurses or any other health field. So have anybody asked them after these studies have done, like, see, you are treating or over-treating patients because they are Black. Are they aware that this is happening? Do they justify their decisions? Or is like something that we know, but actually nobody accepts it?
So these studies that you mentioned, they were all conducted in Brazil. Some of these studies, they collected primary data. And these studies that collected primary data, they did a case scenario. So what is that? So they showed, for instance, I participated in one of these studies that I show here. So what we did, so it's basically what they did as well. So we showed two pictures, right? One of a black patient and another one of a white patient, but they had the same mouth. So we did we manipulated the pictures. So when the dentist or the undergrad students did they went to for us to collect the study, they did not know that they were being assessed in terms of different treatment for race, right? So skin color, color race, how we call it in Brazil, right? So we, of course, so after that, you analyze the study and you can see, because we had age, we had gender, we had other issues. So we assessed that. But I don't know, and I have to, this is an interesting question. I don't know if any of the studies went back and talked with the dentist. We didn't observe any differences among the undergrads. So we didn't observe, we couldn't see that the undergrad students here in our university, they chose worse treatment for Black patients. So because we didn't see that, we didn't act on it because we didn't see the problem. But at the same time, this was the time that I went to do my PhD. So this is something that I advocate on. I really think that we should have classes and doing disciplines talking about racism and talk about things that happen in our society. And not only racism, but let's say discrimination against people that have different sexualities and gender and anything, So we should advocate on that. But some of these studies, I don't know if they went back and talked to the dentists, and it's a very interesting question. I have to look at their papers to see if they mentioned that.
Lesbia is again asking a question. So she's asking, is it possible to lead initiatives from the dental consultation?
What does she mean by that? What does she mean by lead?
Lesbia, if you can explain it, but if you want to, I can do my own interpretation. But
maybe try to make a conversation with dentists. Sorry.
I was waiting. Maybe Lesbia want to say something.
Maybe talking to dentists to see if we can act on it.
I have the feeling is, can dentists do something?
Oh, for sure. I think everyone should do something. And I think it's something that we mentioned throughout these policy recommendations and the recommendations prior to that. I think anyone should do something. And also, let's say us, right? So I'm teaching here in the university, and I don't have any Black colleagues. I don't have any Black students. So what's going on? What's happening here? So should we speak up? Yes, we should speak up. We should go to board meetings. We should be trying to bring people from and have a equal distribution among our universities. So this is the first thing we should do. So are we having, do we have colleagues for all ethnic backgrounds in Chile, in your university? Do I have here in Brazil? No, I don't. So this is something that we should do as dentists. So also if we are working outside university in a private office, we have, so what dentists should do, they have to be aware. They have to be aware of the burden that these groups of individuals, these minorities are, facing throughout history, not only them, but their parents, their grandparents. And this has impacted their lives because they live on a discriminatory society. So when they go to the dentist, they are not only having a dental carie problems, they only have, I'm only having a periodontal problem. No, you have so many things going on in your life. So dentists should be aware of this problem, these inequities, and then should, try to bring more empathy to these issues and trying to be more human and more, try to work on it. We have to have better, equal societies, anyone should act on it.
Excellent. Well, because of the time, we are going to leave this conversation until here. I'm going to thank you again. I do think this is a really so important topic that is almost forgotten when you go to the university. So thanks for coming and talk to us about it and to open the conversation. I want to thank everybody that comes tonight to watch Elena and everybody that has stayed the whole hour. So thank everybody, and that's it. I don't know.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Alejandra. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, everyone, for watching and answering and asking questions. And this is going to be on YouTube, right? Afterwards. So they can go on my email or João email. They can go on my Twitter page. They can. This conversation should and go on, and you can ask me anytime any questions. Okay. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Pedro.
Yes, thank you so much, Elena. I very appreciate your times and your possibility. That's these lectures. So that's all. I hope you can after this pandemic is finishing, coming to Chile and have a potential lectures here with Alejandra or what that is possible.
Obrigada.
Go to Floripa.
Obrigada. Eu quero muito visitar o Chile um dia, esperar a pandemia passar e podemos ir ao Chile e vocês vêm para o Brasil.
Oh, feliz. Vamos allá. Together go to the Camboriú beach.
It's very close. É muito perto, very close.
Legal. Muito obrigado, Elena. Muito boa noite. ¿Ya?
Buenas noches. Muchas gracias a todos.
Sí. Y bueno, para todo también despedir a nuestra interventora, Alejandra Letelier. Muchas gracias.
Un gusto.
Muy obrigado, Alejandra. Thank you so much. Políglotas. Y bueno, a todos nuestros oyentes, ahora por favor pueden escribir sus nombres completos y correo electrónico para hacer la certificación correspondiente, ¿ok? Muchas gracias a todos. Próxima conferencia vamos a dar un pequeño break, ¿cierto? A nuestra secretaria, a nuestros organizadores. Saludo a Alejandra Pérez, que es nuestra secretaria que certifica. Y en 2 semanas más, la primera semana de julio, ¿sí? Vamos a informar la próxima conferencia, ¿ok? Así que muchas gracias nuevamente. Escriban sus correos, sus nombres y nos vemos en una próxima ocasión con estas conferencias al sur de Chile. Chao, Elena. Chao.
Chao, bye bye. Adiós.
Chao.